This video is a supplemental lecture that expands upon material covered in the video entitled Philosophy 301 Response Paper Guidelines 8 Weeks, and you can find a link to that video in the description section below. This video provides further explanation of the purpose of the response paper assignments. Previously, we saw that the response paper assignment requires you to criticize or argue against the argument that you are writing about. And naturally, you might wonder, why is this required? You might wonder, what if I agree with the author's argument? This is a good question, and it deserves a substantial response. And the purpose of this video will be to provide such a response and address this question by explaining the benefits of being able to take a critical stance toward any argument. Even those arguments, or perhaps especially those arguments which we find convincing or which argue for conclusions that we agree with. First, it is vital to recognize that the reason for this requirement is not because I actually require you to think that what the author is saying is incorrect. You may very well find the argument the author makes persuasive and believe it to be completely sound reasoning. So the reason I have this requirement is not because I need you or want you to think a certain way or believe any particular point of view. Rather, it is because engaging with an argument critically forces you to think more deeply about it. If a student writes a paper agreeing with an author, the temptation will always be there to simply reproduce the author's thoughts with some complimentary statements about how correct the author's claims are. One can, of course, agree with an argument after reflecting upon it in a deep and serious way, but in many cases the temptation will be to simply take the author's points at face value without really thinking about them very much. And if the purpose of this assignment is to train you to be able to think critically and evaluate a philosophical argument, then such an approach would not be very useful. There is a further point to make here as well. Beyond the fact that criticizing an argument is a useful academic exercise, it is also an important skill for your own development as a thinker. In fact, I would point out that not only do I believe it is perfectly fine to engage in criticism of a position you think is correct, I would actually go even further and claim that doing so is a positive good. Doing so provides you with an excellent opportunity for self-development. But what precisely is this opportunity? To answer this question, consider the following famous quote that comes from a book entitled On Liberty, written by the 19th century philosopher John Stuart Mill. In that work, Mill remarked that, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may have been able to refute them. But if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either opinion." Now, Mill made this comment in the context of defending the right to freedom of speech. He believed it was important to live in a society that permits freedom of expression because it is important that we hear the opinions of those who disagree with us. It is important to understand the specific good of free speech that Mill is identifying here. Mill is not saying that when we live in a society that permits freedom of expression, then we will have greater opportunity to be refuted by our ideological opponents. That is, greater opportunity to have our false beliefs corrected by others. This actually is a part of what makes freedom of speech valuable, but that is not the specific point that Mill is making in this passage. Rather, in this particular passage, Mill points out that we still benefit from hearing opposing arguments even if those arguments do nothing to change or modify our original point of view. Even if after encountering opposing arguments, our beliefs remain unchanged. This benefit stems from the fact that if we have never encountered arguments against what we believe, then we have no real justification for holding our beliefs or any other beliefs in the first place. How can we be so sure we are correct if we cannot say anything about the opinions of those who believe differently? In fact, I think we can actually go even farther here. I think it is also true that we cannot even understand our own beliefs if we have never come into contact with those who would criticize them. When we face criticism of our own beliefs, we are forced to think about them more deeply, to respond to weak points in the arguments we previously found convincing, and look at the world from a different perspective. Again, at times the result of this might be that we find our present and current belief lacking. But even if we remain convinced that our original belief is correct, that does not mean that everything is the same as before. By being forced to consider our worldview through a more critical eye, we come to better understand the foundation that worldview is built upon. We may now be able to spell out more clearly the reasons that support what we believe, precisely because we were forced to do so in an encounter with those who think differently. As such, confronting criticism can lead to a superior self-understanding. This is why those who believe something to be true without ever so much as considering the reasons others may have for thinking differently not only fail to understand the perspective of others, but they hardly even understand the rational basis for their own way of looking at the world. And in addition to providing an excellent opportunity for self-understanding, this practice of taking a critical eye towards one's own beliefs also helps us develop a healthy sense of intellectual humility that promotes greater understanding of other people. Consider any controversial philosophical, religious, political, or moral issue, the kind of issue that quickly divides people into opposing sides and causes heated disagreement. The kind of issue that, when brought up for discussion, can quickly suck all the fun out of an otherwise pleasant dinner party or family gathering. In these cases, it is particularly easy to assume that those who disagree with us are either evil or they are stupid. Either they do not see the clear and obvious reasons for what I know is true, in which case they are stupid, or they simply do not care about what is true and good, in which case they are evil. But this is obviously a harmful and toxic way to look at our peers, but unfortunately it is also all too common. Now, there is a remedy for this situation, but it requires self-discipline, curiosity, and a fair amount of humility. The remedy is an honest engagement with those who disagree with us. And if we approach those who disagree with us in good faith, with a willingness to honestly listen to what they have to say, then it will be very difficult to castigate our opponents as either stupid or evil. Now, ultimately, we might and probably will still believe that our opponents hold some false beliefs. We will believe that they are incorrect about certain things, but if we have gone through this process of honestly considering their point of view, then we will better understand their thought process. And if we see that they have legitimate reasons that lead them to sincerely disagree with us, then it will be very difficult for us to think they are either stupid or evil. They simply see the world differently than we do, and they have their reasons for doing so. When done well, such honest intellectual encounters can provide the basis for more harmonious relationships among those who disagree on questions of fundamental human importance. Now, to come full circle, we have seen that the response paper assignment may require you to engage in some degree of self-criticism, of criticizing beliefs that you believe are true and correct. But I hope that you will view such instances as opportunities to deepen your own understanding of your own worldview and gain a greater amount of sympathy and understanding for those who see the world differently.